What's going on, guys? It's fight season MMA, and today I want to make a video talking about the most overrated fighters in the UFC currently. These fighters are the fighters that get too much hype. These are the fighters who think that they're a lot better than they really are, and these are the fighters that fans truly just cannot stand seeing inside the UFC octagon. All fighters are decent, and all fighters have some hype behind them, but these are the guys that are overhyped inside the UFC, think that they're too good, and are just absolutely overrated within the UFC organization. If you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That's the best way to help the channel grow. And prior to us getting into the video, go down and hit a subscribe, drop a like, and turn on the post notifications just so you guys can always stay updated with the latest UFC content. But with no further ado, let's jump right into the video, the top 10 most overrated fighters inside the UFC right now. First overrated fighter, these are in no particular order, but the first overrated fighter in my opinion is Vicente Luque. Vicente Luque was a great fighter until he fought Jeff Neal and had a brain hemorrhage, which is just, you know, an awful thing to see. Ever since then, Vicente Luque's got a lot of hype. He fought Joaquin Buckley, looked awful in that fight. He fought RDA, didn't look great in that fight, even though he got the win. Vicente Luque just has lost all the steam because of his injury, and I do think he's overhyped because of that. Now, I think it's a sad way to be overhyped because truly I think Vicente Luque is a good guy. He's the silent assassin for a reason. He's got a really good fighting style prior to fighting Jeff Neal, but ever since going in there with Jeff Neal and having all that PTSD and that brain damage caused Vicente Luque to really lose what he was really good at, and that was being in the UFC and being an amazing fighter. That is why Vicente Luque is the first person on this list of the most overrated fighters on the UFC. Next fighter in my overrated fighters list is Alexandre Pantoja. And Alexandre Pantoja is the current flyweight champion, but I just truly do not think he is that good. He's got a great iron chin, and that's why he can walk through a bunch of these punches. But Steve Erceg, in my opinion, beat him at UFC 301, and that was a pretty good performance from Erceg, but Pantoja ended up getting the nod for the win. So I do think that Pantoja is going to be able to dominate a lot of these other flyweights, but the flyweight division is not that deep. Pantoja gets the rap that he's going to be one of the best, most long-reigning champions inside the UFC, which he might, but that's not a testament to how good Pantoja is, rather than how bad the competition is in that flyweight division. So truly, I don't think Pantoja should be champion. I thought he lost to Moreno that second time. I thought that he dominated Royval, but he did end up losing to Steve Erceg at UFC 301. And just Pantoja is a great grappler, but his striking, his cardio, his chin, I mean, just some of those things aren't that great. His chin is amazing, but his striking and his cardio just aren't that great. So that's why I think Alexandre Pantoja is a valid candidate for this top 10 or these top 10 overrated fighters list. Next fighter on my list, I have Mr. Secret Juice Paulo Costa. When he fought Robert Whittaker, he looked pretty bad in that fight. The only thing that was good in that fight was that spinning wheel kick at the end of the first round. If not, Paulo Costa got 30-27 throughout the entire fight. Robert Whittaker was doing anything he wanted to him and was truly going in there to just dismantle Paulo Costa. Now, on the other hand, Sean Strickland fight with Paulo Costa. Sean Strickland went in there and dismantled Paulo Costa. It wasn't even a close fight, but Strickland just did what he needed to do, went in there and absolutely decimated Mr. Costa himself. So truly, I think Paulo Costa is getting a very overhyped rap. I think a lot of people enjoy Paulo Costa for being this entertaining fighter, but that Sean Strickland fight was incredibly boring. I mean, in that Robert Whittaker fight, Whittaker was the fighter making it entertaining and whatnot. So I think that Paulo Costa is an incredibly overrated fighter in that middleweight division, and that's why I have him as one of the top 10 most overrated fighters in the UFC, and here on my list. Next fighter on my top overrated fighters in the UFC list is Mr. Jamahal Sweet Dreams Hill. Now, Jamahal Hill is an incredibly big power puncher. He's got great hands, but I think that his frame, his movement, his IQ, his cardio isn't really the greatest. Now, I know he beat Glover Teixeira at UFC 283 in a 5-round, masterclass, but I think Glover Teixeira was on the downfall, and I think we really saw against Alex Pereira of how, I shouldn't say bad of a striker he is, but of how lackluster of a striker he is inside that UFC light heavyweight division. I think that Jamahal Hill is going to need to step back in there in the octagon, and my biggest pet peeve about Jamahal Hill is he talks a big game but hasn't signed a fight to fight anyone, and that is absolutely crazy in my opinion. I know he had Khalil Rountree Jr., but then he had Carlos Ulberg, and he pulled out against Ulberg, and now he doesn't have a fight scheduled. I know he's talking about how he wants to fight Magomed Ankalaev, but truly I don't think Jamahal Hill wants that fight. Jamahal Hill 100% needs to be on these top overrated fighters list inside the UFC, and truly I just don't know what to do with Hill anymore inside the organization. My next overrated fighter inside the UFC is Mr. Yair El Pantera Rodriguez. Yair Rodriguez is a great fighter, but his IQ is just incredibly questionable in my opinion. And a great thing to allude to is that Brian Ortega fight. Yair Rodriguez 1080'd Brian Ortega in the first round. The next round was incredibly close, and then the next round he got finished, and that was because Yair Rodriguez was not making adjustments, and Ortega won the fight off of straight making adjustments. Yair Rodriguez is a great fighter. He's an incredibly fun fighter, but truly is a smart fighter. I don't know, and I think that's the biggest overrated thing in the standpoint. He just looks incredibly frail and weak on the feet, and that Alexander Volkanovski fight, he was getting thrown around like a rag doll, and I actually had Yair Rodriguez winning that fight, so it was incredibly sad to see him get dominated in that fashion. To truly get him getting a takedown, he was getting power bombed by Volk, dominated in the standpoint. It looked like a flyweight was going up against a welterweight in that standpoint. It was truly bad to see. That's why I think Yair Rodriguez belongs on this list. Next fighter on my list is Mr. Beneil Dariush. Now, Beneil Dariush had a great win over Mateusz Gamrot, but ever since then, he lost to Charles Oliveira and he lost to Arman Tsarukyan. And those are two great UFC lightweights, but Beneil Dariush was like maybe even favored to beat Charles Oliveira, and he got dominated in that first round. And he was, a good fighter against Arman Tsarukyan, got finished in 1 minute. So I think that a lot of these fighters are understanding that Beneil Dariush is one of the best inside the UFC, which he's a great fighter, but he's not one of the best inside the UFC. There's a lot of different lightweights who I would pick to beat him, guys above him and some guys below him that I think could beat Beneil. And truly, I just think he's an older fighter who's going to be on the downcline. Not saying that he's not a good fighter, because I definitely think he is good. It's just he's not held to the standard that a lot of other individuals hold Beneil Dariush inside the UFC. And that is why I believe that Beneil Dariush belongs on the top 10 most overrated fighters inside the UFC list. Next fighter to be on my top 10 most overrated fighters inside the UFC organization list is Mr. Sergei Pavlovich. Sergei Pavlovich just got absolutely fraud checked by Alexander Volkov at UFC Saudi Arabia in June, and he lost a fight against Tom Aspinall at UFC 295 last November, in a fight that he got dominated and got finished in 1 minute, and that Volkov fight he got dominated and decimated over 3 rounds. I think Pavlovich has such power that it covered up a lot of his flaws, but Pavlovich isn't even that great striker, rather than just has some of the heaviest hands inside the UFC organization. I don't know about his takedown defense. I think if Tom Aspinall can go in there and take down Pavlovich, I think someone like Jailton Almeida could. And I think that Sergei Pavlovich, yes, has some of the best hands inside the UFC, power-wise, but his technique isn't really that good. His footwork isn't really that good, and I think he got absolutely exposed by Alexander Volkov. I think the Volkov loss was a lot more, critical to his career rather than the Tom Aspinall loss, considering that Aspinall's run through everyone inside the UFC division, but Volkov just pitter-pattered Pavlovich around for 3 rounds, getting the decision win ultimately. Next fighter on my list is Mr. Leon Rocky Edwards. Leon Edwards he looked so bad against Belal Muhammad, and a lot of these other fights against Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, he didn't even look great. I think our perception changed with that Kamaru Usman knockout, because we thought he turned into some incredible sniper from this, but he's just a point fighter. I don't know. Leon Edwards has so many questions inside the UFC for me. If he was super aggressive, he would be one of the best pound for pound fighters in the organization. He's got great jiu-jitsu, he's got great striking. He just doesn't have that mindset to go in there and win a UFC fight, and it is something that's so sad to see. Leon Edwards was one of my favorite fighters when he was on that Kamaru Usman train. Even that third Kamaru Usman fight, he looked a lot better than the Colby Covington fight and this Belal Muhammad fight, but Leon Edwards just got too filled in his shoes. He was too cocky and truly got absolutely decimated by Belal Muhammad, which was something that not a lot of people were expecting, but Belal went in there and did his business, kind of just said, Leon Edwards, you're not that good, which was really exposed in that fight, and that's why I think Leon Edwards was so overrated, and I think he's still overrated, although it has got a lot better, considering a lot of the MMA community understands that Leon Edwards is just a point fighter. The next fighter I got on my list is Mr. Mateusz Gamrot. Now, Mateusz Gamrot was a fighter who was getting a good amount of hype going into this Dan Hooker bout at UFC 305. I said that he would lose to Hooker, and he lost to Hooker. I don't know what to say, but Gamrot is one of the most overhyped fighters inside the UFC. I truly think he's not a great fighter at all. He's just spams takedowns, which I don't think is something that you can do to win a title. The fact that he was going to get a shot against Islam Makhachev was just going to be the biggest absolute domination inside the UFC organization. Islam was going to go in there and throw this dude outside the octagon and literally kill him if it was in there, which is something absolutely insane to see. So I just think that Mateusz Gamrot is just so overrated. He's got to fight someone below him. Maybe a Paddy Pimblett fight, but I think that Mateusz Gamrot doesn't have a future in the lightweight division. I think he's never going to be champion. I think he's going to be kind of a gatekeeper of the top 10 or top 15. And I do think that the loss to Dan Hooker was incredibly pivotal for his career. Letting someone who is a lot older like Hooker go in there and kind of body you is something crazy to see. That's why I have Mateusz Gamrot on my top 10 most overrated fighters in the UFC list. Now, the last person on my list, and I think it's a very easy consensus person to put on here, is Colby Covington. Colby Covington against Leon Edwards looked genuinely awful, and Colby Covington at one point was a very exciting fighter. Those two Usman wars were some of the best wars inside the UFC, but, Colby Covington against Leon Edwards just looked like a shell of his former self. Even Colby Covington against Jorge Masvidal looked like a shell of his former self. So I truly think that Colby Covington is not a great fighter inside the UFC. He's got a lot different aspirations. Now, I know he's like a professional poker player or something, but Colby Covington truly is not a UFC fighter. He's just not. He goes out there, he's got great cardio, but even against Leon Edwards, he didn't have great cardio. So I don't know. Colby Covington is easily one of the most overrated fighters inside the UFC. He deserves nothing of what he's gotten in those 3 championship opportunities. He lost all of those fights, and against Leon Edwards, who was really not even trying in there, and a fighter who was just trying to take down Colby Covington to prove a point. I think Leon Edwards just absolutely decimated Colby Covington. That was something that was incredibly embarrassing to see. Colby Covington 100% is probably my most overrated fighter inside the UFC, but 100% is deserving to be on this list. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think down below in the comments about my top 10 most overrated fighters inside the UFC. Now, this list is in no particular order, but these are just the top 10 most overrated fighters in my opinion inside the organization. These are the fighters that get the most hype, just the fighters that I feel like are just absolutely hyped up by MMA fans for no reason at all and have nothing to back up behind it. Some of these fighters are in a sad way because Vicente Luque was actually a great fighter prior to having that brain hemorrhage, but someone like Colby Covington just is a genuine bad fighter in my opinion and has no consensus to win inside the UFC octagon. But thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the UFC content, and I will see you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.